But H.J. Cranin. In this excerpt from the Citadel, Andrew Mason, newly out of medical school, has just begun his medical practice as an assistant as an assistant to Dr. Edward Page in the small Welsh mining town of Blaney, as he is returning from a disappointing evening with Christiane, the girl he loves. He is met by Joe Morgan. Joe and his wife, who have been married nearly 20 years, are expecting their first child. Though it was nearly midnight when Andrew reached Bryngelly, he found Joe Morgan waiting for him, walking up and down with short steps between the closed surgery and the entrance to the house. At the sight of him, he barely the driller's face expressed relief. Doctor, I am glad to see you. I've been back and forward here is last hour or Mrs. Once, yeah, before time to Andrew abruptly recalled from the contemplation of his own affairs, told Morgan to wait. He went into the house for his bag. Then together they set out for number 12 Laina Terrace. The night air was cool and deep with quiet mystery. Usually so perceptive, Andrew now felt dull and listless. He had no premonition premonition that his night call would prove unusual, still less that it would influence his whole future in Blaney. The two men walked in silence and until they reached the door of November 12th, then Joe drew up short. "I will come in," he said, and his voice showed signs of strain, "but man, I know you will do well for us." Inside, a narrow stair led to a small bedroom, clean but poorly furnished, and lit only by an oil lamp. Here Mrs. Morgan's mother, a tall, grey-haired woman of nearly 70, and the stout, elderly wife waited beside the patient, watching Andrew's expression as he moved about the room. "Let me let me make you a cup of tea, Dr. Batch," said the former quickly after a few moments. Andrew smiled faintly. He saw that the old man, wise in experience, realized there must be a period of waiting, that she was afraid he would leave the case, saying he would return later. "Don't fret, mother, I will not run away." Down in the kitchen, he drank the tea which she gave him. Overwrought as he was, he knew he could not snatch even an hour's sleep if he went home. He knew too that the case here would demand all his attention. A queer lethargy of spirit came upon him. He decided to remain until everything was over. An hour later he went upstairs again, noted the progress made, came down once more, sat by the kitchen fire. It was still, except for the rustle of beige cinder in the grate and the slow tick-tock of the wall clock. No, there was another sound, the beat of Morgan's footsteps as he paced in the street outside. The old woman opposite him sat in her black dress, quite motionless, her eyes strangely alive, wise, probing, never leaving his face. His thoughts were heavy, muddled. The episode he had witnessed at Cardiff Station will still obsessed him morbidly. He thought of Bramwell, foolishly devoted to a woman who deceived him sordidly, of Edward Page, bound to the shrewish Plowden, of Denny, living unhappily apart from his wife. His reason told him that all these marriages were dismal failures. It was a conclusion which, in his present state, made him wince. He, he wished to consider marriage as an idyllic state. Yes, he could not otherwise consider it with the image of Christian before him. Her eyes, shining towards him, admitted no other conclusion. It It was the conflict between his level doubting and mind and his overflowing heart which left him resentful and confused. He let his chin sink upon his chest, stretched out his legs, started broodingly into the fire. He remained like this long days like this so long, and his thoughts were so filled with Christian that he started when the old woman opposite suddenly addressed him. Her meditation had pursued a different course. Susan said not to give her the chloroform if it would harm the baby. She was awful set upon this child, Dr. Batch. Her old eyes warmed at a sudden thought. She added in a low tone, "Eh, we all are, I fancy." He collected himself with an effort. It won't do any harm. The anesthetic, he said kindly. They will be all right. Here the nurse's voice was heard calling from the top landing. Andrew glanced at the clock, which now showed 3:30. He rose and went up to the bedroom. He perceived that she might now begin his work. An hour elapsed. It was a long, harsh struggle. Then, as the first streaks up, down, straight past the broken edges of the blind, the child was born lifeless. As he gazed at the still form, a shiver of horror passed over Andrew. After all that he had promised, his face heated with his own exertions, chilled suddenly. He hesitated, torn between his desire to attempt to resuscitate the child and his obligation towards the mother who was herself in a desperate state. The dilemma was so urgent he did not solve it consciously. Blindly, instinctively, he gave the child to the nurse and turned his attention to Susan Morgan, who now lay collapsed, almost pulseless, and now yet out of the either upon her side. His haste was desperate, a frantic race against her ebbing strength. Took him only an instant to smash a glass ampule and inject the medicine. Then he flung down the hypodermic syringe and worked unsparingly to restore the flaccid woman. After a few minutes of feverish effort, her heart strengthened. He saw that he might safely leave her. He swung around in his shirt sleeves, his hair sticking to his damp brow. "Where's the child?" The midwife made a frightened gesture. She had placed it beneath the bed. In a flash, Andrew knelt down, fishing amongst the sodden newspaper below the bed. He pulled out the child, a boy, perfectly formed. The limp, warm body was white, soft as as allow. The cord hastily slashed any like a broken stem. The skin was of a lovely texture, smooth, tender. The head lolled on the thin neck. The limbs seemed boneless. Still kneeling, Andrew started. A child with haggard from the whiteness meant only one thing: asphyxia pallida, and his mind, unnaturally tense, raced back to a case he once had seen in a Samaritan, to the treatment that had been used. Instantly he was on his feet. "Get me hot water and cold water," he threw out to the nurse. "And basins too, quick, quick." "But, doctor," she faltered, her eyes on the pallid body of the child. "Quick!" he shouted. Snatching a blanket, he laid the child upon it and began the special method of respiration. The basins arrived. The ewer, the big iron kettle. Frantically, he splashed cold water into one basin into the other. He mixed water as hot as his hand could bear. Then, like some crazy juggler, he hurried the child between the two, now plunging it into the icy, now into the steaming bath. 15 minutes passed. Sweat was now running into Andrew's eyes, blinding him. One of his sleeves hung down, dripping. His breath came pantingly, but no breath came from the lax body of the child. A desperate sense of defeat depressed on him, a raging hopelessness. He felt the midwife watching him in stark consternation, while they pressed back against the wall where she had all the time remained, her hand pressed to her throat, uttering no sound, her eyes burning upon him as the old woman. He remembered her longing for a grandchild as great as had been her daughter's longing for this child, all dashed away now, futile beyond remedy. The floor was now a draggled mess. Stumbling over a sopping towel, Andrew almost dropped the child, which was now wet and slippery in his hands like a strange white fish. For mercy's sake, doctor, whimpered the wife, it's a stillborn, it's a stillborn. Andrew did not heed her, beaten, despairing, having labored in vain for half an hour. He still persisted in one last effort, rubbing the child with a rough towel, crushing and releasing the little chest with both his hands, trying to get breath into that limp body. And then, as by a miracle, the pygmy chest which his hands enclosed gave a short, convulsive heave. Another and another. Andrew turned giddy, the sense of life springing beneath his fingers after all that unavailing striving was so exquisite it almost made him faint. He redoubled his efforts feverishly. The child was gasping now, deeper and deeper. A bubble of mucus came from one tiny nostril, a joyful, iridescent bubble. The limbs were no longer boneless, the head no longer lay back spinelessly. The blanched skin was slowly turning pink. Then exquisitely came the child's cry, "Dear Father in heaven," the nurse sobbed hysterically. It's come alive." Andrew handed her the child. He felt weak and danced about him. The room lay in a shuddering litter. Blankets, towels, basins, soiled instruments, the hypodermic syringe impaled by its point in the linoleum. The ewer knocked over the kettle on its side in a puddle of water upon the hurdle bed. The mother still dreamed her way quietly through the anesthetic. The old woman still stood against the wall, but her hands were together, her lips moved without sound. She was praying mechanically. Andrew wrung out his sleeve, pulled on his jacket. "I will fetch my bag later, nurse." He went downstairs through the kitchen into the scullery. His lips were dry at the scullery. He took a long drink of water. He reached for his hat and coat. Outside, he found Joe standing on the pavement with a tense, expectant, expectant face. "All right, Joe," he had thickly. "Both all right, both all right." It was quite night light, nearly 5 o'clock. A few minutes miners were already in the streets, the first of the night shift moving out as Andrew walked with them, spent and slow, his footfalls echoing with the others under the morning sky. He kept thinking blindly, oblivious to all other work he had done in blindly. "I have done something, oh God, I have done something real at last." So it was a story. If I talk about the introduction we should like this, but is an excerpt from the Citadel that revolves around Andrew Mason. Andrew Mason Andrew Mason, who just graduated from medical school. It is an account of how the newly graduated medical practitioner helped in bringing Joe and Susan's child into this world despite going through a tough time with his girlfriend Christine. The lesson begins with Andrew walking towards his home after having an unpleasant time with his girlfriend Christine. Upon reaching home at around midnight, he finds Joe Morgan outside his house, waiting for him. Joe and Susan had been expecting a child. Upon reaching, Joe tells Andrew that he is too anxious to be going inside. So Andrew walks in alone. He realizes that there is still some time left. Susan's mother, who is wise but tense at the moment, offers him some tea. While he is sipping his tea, he begins thinking about his girlfriend. He recalls how his friends too are having a hard time in their relationships. On the other hand, he feels that marriage is meant to be something peaceful and cheerful. Thus, he finds himself in a conflict. Susan's mother tells him tells him how worried Susan is for the child because the situation is complicated. After performing the procedures, the child is born but is lifeless. Confused between addressing the child or the mom, who herself laid unconscious at the moment, he chooses to look after Susan first. He injected her with a few medicine, and when he realized that her heart was regaining its strength, he turned towards the child. It was a boy in perfect shape. He suddenly remembered that it was a case of restricted oxygen supply, and thus they instructed the nurse to get hot and cold water. The nurse, reluctant at first, got him got him what he needed, and he juggled the child in hot and cold water simultaneously. After all this is effort, the child still lay lifeless. All others had already lost hope. While he continued with the procedures, finally the child heaved and got his breath. His body was no longer still, leaving everyone surprised. The nurse muttered words of prayer while holding the child. The grandmother was also praying while Susan still lay unconscious. Exhausted, Andrew left while informing Joe that all is well. While he was walking home at around 5 in the morning, his heart was full at having accomplished something real in his life. पाठ की शुरुआत एंड्रो द्वारा शुरुआत एंड्रो द्वारा अपनी प्रेमिका क्रिस्टाइन एंड्रू द्वारा अपने प्रेमिका क्रिस्टाइन के साथ अप्रिय समय बिताने के बाद अपने घर की ओर चलता चलते से होती है। लगभग आधी रात को घर पहुंचने पर आ, वो जो मर्गन के अपने घर के बाहर उसका इंतजार करते हुए आता है। जो और सुसान एक बच्चे की उम्मीद उम्मीद कर रहे थे। जो जो ने पहुंचने पर एंड्रू को बताया कि वो अंदर जाने के लिए बहुत चिंतित है, इसलिए एंड्रू अकेले ही अंदर चला जाता है। उसे पता चलता है कि अभी कुछ समय बाकी है। सुसान की माँ, जो समझदार है लेकिन इस समय तनाव में है, उसे उसे चाय देती है। जब वो चाय की चुस्की ले रहा होता है, तो वो अपनी प्रेमिका के बारे में सोचने लगता है। वो याद करता है कि कैसे उसके दोस्त भी अपने रिश्तों में कठिन समय बिता रहे हैं। दूसरी ओर, उसे लगता है कि शादी का मतलब कुछ शांतिपूर्ण और खुशमिजाज होना चाहिए। इस प्रकार वो खुद को एक संघर्ष में पाता है। सुसान की माँ उसे बताती है कि सुसान बताती है प्रेमिका करने के बाद बच्चे का जन्म होता है। दूसरी ओर उसे लगता है कि शादी का मतलब कुछ शांतिपूर्ण और खुशमिजाज होना चाहिए। इस प्रकार वो खुद को एक संघर्ष में पाता है। सुसान की माँ उसे बताती है कि सुसान बच्चे के लिए कितनी सुसान बच्चे के लिए कितनी चिंतित हो क्योंकि क्योंकि स्थिति जटिल हो। प्रक्रिया करने के बाद बच्चों का जन्म होता है, लेकिन वो बेजान होता है और एंड्रू दुविधा में है कि बच्चे या माँ में से किसको संबोधित करे। सुसान खुद इस समय बेहोश थी। एंड्रू पहले सुसान की देखभाल करना चुनता है। उसने उसे कुछ दवाएं की और दवाएं दी और जब उसने महसूस किया कि उसका दिल अपनी ताकत हासिल कर रहा है, तो उसने बच्चों की ओर रुख किया। नवजात शिशु एकदम सही आकार का लड़का था। उसे अचानक याद आया कि वो प्रतिबंधित ऑक्सीजन की आपूर्ति का मामला था और इस प्रकार उसने नर्स को गर्म और ठंडा पानी लाने का निर्देश दिया। नर्स पहले तो अनि नर्स पहले तो अनिश्चित थी, पर उसने उससे वो दिया जो उसे चाहिए था और उसने बच्चे को एक साथ गर्म और ठंडे पानी में डाल दिया। तमाम कोशिशों के बाद भी बच्चा बेजान पड़ा था। अन्य सभी पहले ही उम्मीद खो चुके थे, जबकि एंड्रू ने प्रक्रिया को को जारी रखा। अंत में बच्चे ने गहरी सांस ली। उसका शरीर अब बेजान नहीं था, जिससे सभी हो, हो हैरान रह गए। नर्स ने बच्चे को पकड़ते हुए प्रार्थना की के शब्द धीर से कहे। दादी भी प्रार्थना कर रही थी, जबकि सुसन अभी भी बेहोश थे। थके हुए एंड्रू जो को सूचित करते हुए चला गया कि सब ठीक है। जब वो सुबह करीब 5 बजे घर जा रहा था, तो उसका दिल अपने जीवन में कुछ वास्तविक मुकाम हासिल करने के लिए खुश था।